Hello, my name is Deanna Hyrulina. I am a professional tarot reader. Today, we will look at the second part of the reading on Benjamin Netanyahu as a political figure, Block 3, why he makes decisions that activate and fuel the Middle East conflict. Position 15, how he sees the conflict. The Tarot Arcana, Eight of Swords, reversed. In his internal perception, the conflict appears as a painful awakening after a prolonged period of restriction. Netanyahu does not see the Middle East conflict as a confrontation. To him, it is a situation perceived as a betrayal, one that gives him the right to respond and creates a sense of release from a previous mental trap. Within this perception, defeats and losses become the price of regaining control. Pain brings clarity, and with that clarity comes the conviction that obstacles can ultimately be overcome if one changes one's perspective and begins to act more actively. Position 16, the boundary. What he is not prepared to concede. The Tarot Arcana, Temperance, Upright. The concessions are not related to territories or terms. They concern the pace of action that allows him to maintain control over the situation. Temperance speaks of the need to preserve balance without allowing sudden surges, chaos, interruption, or loss of rhythm. In this position, security is understood as a properly established order, a structured framework, a balance of power, the ability to integrate new circumstances, and the ability to prevent events from destroying the internal structure. For him, making a concession in this area could mean not a gesture of peace, but a loss of control. Temperance represents a precise rhythm. To stop means to break that rhythm. Therefore, the rhythm of military operations within the conflict is the boundary he is not prepared to concede. Position 17. The fear behind his harsh decisions. The Tarot Arcana, the Hanged Man, reversed. Behind his harsh decisions lies the fear of sacrifice made in vain. This card reveals an internal fear that waiting, pausing, or making concessions will not solve the problem, but will only consume time, strength, and resources. It is the fear of losing control and allowing events to take their own course, because the sacrifices already made could then prove to have been in vain. For this reason, his harshness is born not only from strength, but also from anxiety. If he stops, the price of the losses already suffered may lose its meaning. Position 18. What he gains through escalation. The Tarot Arcana, King of Cups, Upright through escalation. He gains emotional leadership. The King of Cups, in the upright position, speaks of the ability to understand the human psyche, sense people's motivations, and influence them through emotion while projecting outward calm. In the political arena, this gives him the ability to speak not only in the language of calculation, but also in the language of collective feeling, pain, fear, protection, compassion, and a shared destiny. In this way, he becomes a figure capable of holding the emotional field around himself and directing it in the desired direction. Position 19. What he loses through escalation. The Tarot Arcana, Wheel of Fortune. Upright. He loses the stability of a favorable moment. The Wheel of Fortune, in the upright position, offers an opportunity. But this opportunity is short-lived and requires rapid adjustment. Through escalation, he may bring about a sudden turn of events, but at the same time, he loses the ability to calmly consolidate what has already been achieved. Circumstances begin to change too quickly. Plans require revision, and the external current becomes stronger than personal control. The loss here is not the absence of a fortunate opportunity. Rather, escalation and the tense environment surrounding it are more familiar to him, while acting under favorable circumstances requires the skills necessary to make use of those opportunities. And, as we remember, his political archetype was formed on different ground. Position 20. Is there rationality in his decisions? The Tarot Arcana, Two of Wands, Upright. From a rational standpoint, he could explain his decisions in the language of compromise, where the concession itself is less important than the final result. The Two of Wands shows the need to weigh conflicting priorities and search for a form of action that will make a mutually acceptable outcome possible. within his logic. It may sound like this: concessions can be made in tactics, but the main objective must not be lost. Therefore, even harsh decisions may be presented as part of a complex negotiation with reality, in which the final result matters more than the elegance of the path taken to reach it. Position 21. The blind spot in his decisions. The Tarot Arcana. The Lovers. Upright. His blind spot is the very fact that a major choice must be made. The Lovers in the upright position speak of a difficult decision, without which the conflict cannot be stopped. What may be underestimated here is not the strength of the opponent or the pressure of circumstances, but the need to determine internally which path opens the way to the future and which one leaves everything in its previous state of tension. This card shows that the key lies not only in strategy, but also in making a choice, after which processes begin to move faster and become clearer. As long as the choice itself remains in the blind spot, a person is unable to see the ultimate objective or make use of a favorable opportunity. Position 22, where the conflict is greater than he is. The Tarot Arcana, Queen of Cups, Upright. The conflict is greater than he is when it comes to the depth of human emotion. The Queen of Cups represents emotional memory, pain, compassion, and the need to be understood and heard. This is not only about territory and politics. It is an enormous field of human experience in which people need security, care, recognition of their suffering, and the opportunity to release their emotional burden. In this position, the conflict appears as a living human wound that exists far beyond any individual figure of power. Position 23, where his personal choices intensify the conflict. The Tarot Arcana, King of Swords, reversed. His personal choices intensify the conflict where power begins to operate as a cold, intellectual game. The reversed King of Swords represents the abuse of power, rigidity, manipulative control over people, and the desire to play by one's own rules. In this position, the issue is not the existence of power itself, but how that power is used. When strategic intelligence crosses an internal boundary, people become pieces on a board, and a decision becomes a means of affirming power. This is precisely where his personal style intensifies the conflict, because cold calculation loses its human measure. Brief conclusion. The third block shows that, in his perception, the conflict is connected with breaking free from restriction and regaining control through painful clarity. He is unwilling to concede the pace and manageability of the conflict. He fears that sacrifices will prove to have been in vain, and therefore chooses actions that preserve his sense of control. Through escalation, he gains emotional leadership, but loses the stability of a favorable moment. Events begin to move faster than they can be controlled. At the same time, the cards clearly separate two different levels. The conflict itself is greater than any single politician. It contains a vast amount of collective pain, memory, and human vulnerability. However, Netanyahu's personal choices do not heal that pain. They intensify it wherever power becomes too cold, closed, and manipulative. The central message of this block is as follows. Not everything depends on him alone, but the way in which he exercises power can make the conflict harsher and more difficult to resolve. Block 4. Aspects of the pressure on Netanyahu as a political figure. Position 24. Pressure from the coalition and internal allies. The Tarot Arcana. Ace of Pentacles. Upright. The coalition pressures him through the demand for concrete results, resources, and tangible benefits. This is not only about emotions and human pain. A shared idea or an elegant formula of power is not enough for his allies. His internal allies need the tangible realization of what they want, something that can be seen, obtained, distributed, and presented as an achievement. This card shows that maintaining power depends on a delicate balance of needs: political, material, social, and status-related. Alliances are sustained not only by convictions, but also by the ability to transform promises into something tangible. Position 25. Current pressure from the military and the security establishment. The Tarot Arcana, the Hermit, reversed. The security establishment, exerts pressure through the feeling of a prolonged pause in which decisions are postponed. Time drags on, and the meaning of what is happening begins to fall apart. The reversed hermit points to the loss of a clear internal center. The path is blocked. Anxiety about the future grows, and isolation is no longer perceived as order, but as loneliness and exhaustion. In this position, security dictates decisions from the feeling that too much has become frozen and may disrupt the rhythm, while too many issues remain unresolved. The slowdown coming from the military and the security establishment begins to be perceived as a threat. Position 26. Pressure from Israeli society. The tarot arcana, the priestess, reversed. Society exerts pressure through an internal discrepancy between what people feel and what they are forced to see, understand, or accept. The reversed priestess does not indicate a lie as a simple accusation, but a deeper division. Reason and emotion no longer correspond. The soul is exhausted. Trust continues to diminish, and previous explanations no longer provide a sense of internal agreement. In this position, public pressure becomes particularly heavy because it arises not only from fear or anger, but also from pain that cannot reconcile itself with the official portrayal of what is happening. Position 27. Pressure from the law and institutions. The Tarot Arcana, Five of Wands, reversed. The law and institutions exert pressure through a situation of comparison, a struggle over the standard of security, and the risk of defeat. The reversed Five of Wands shows that the danger lies not in the confrontation with an opponent on the battlefield, but in the possibility that, for the sake of the dispute, one will have to descend to a level at which the idea of security can no longer justify the decisions that have been made. In political terms, this pressure forces him to consider the following. A conflict with the law may resemble a competition, but it is easy to lose such a competition. Not because the opponent is stronger or acts unlawfully, but because, in the eyes of the law, the very form of the struggle makes you the same as those you are fighting. Position 28. International legal pressure. The Tarot Arcana, Six of Swords, upright. International law applies pressure like a crossing. It forces him to leave the old cage of decisions and move toward a new framework in relations with the opponent, even if that transition causes anxiety. The Six of Swords speaks of an attempt to leave a difficult situation, to move beyond the boundaries of a familiar environment, and of the need for emotional and personal transformation. Here, pressure from the International Court, the United Nations, and other institutions appears not simply as a background of accusations, but as a force pushing him toward a new reality. The previous way of moving forward no longer provides complete freedom. New steps, new rules, and a different level of responsibility will be required. Position 29. Pressure from enemies and external threats. The Tarot Arcana, Seven of Cups, reversed. External threats exert pressure through the need to become sober and realistic. The reversed Seven of Cups represents the transition from illusions to practical decisions, and from vague expectations to facts that can no longer be ignored. In this position, enemies and regional powers force him to abandon his preferred image of the situation and view it more coldly. What truly matters? Which connections no longer work? And which requests or hopes may have to be rejected so that attention can remain focused solely on what is most important? The pressure here is harsh, but it forces him to look at what is happening without illusions. Position 30. The pressure of history. The Tarot Arcana, Seven of Pentacles, reversed. History exerts pressure through impatience and the fear that the efforts already invested will not produce the expected results. The reverse Seven of Pentacles represents the desire to see results too quickly, the feeling of being overburdened by obligations, and anxiety caused by incorrect calculations or insufficient planning. In this position, the memory of the past does not merely serve as a reminder of pain. It pushes him toward haste and toward the desire to prove immediately that the sacrifices were not made in vain. However, the central lesson of this card is not to disturb the balance and not to rush where a long-term strategy is required. Brief conclusion. The fourth block shows pressure coming from every direction, but each form of pressure has its own nature. The coalition demands tangible results and the distribution of resources. The security establishment creates a sense of prolonged time and a loss of meaning. Society exerts pressure through emotional exhaustion and internal disagreement with what is happening. The law and institutions draw him into a dangerous comparison in which the struggle itself may lead to a loss of status. International law forces a transition toward a new reality. While external threats demand sober judgment and practical decisions, the pressure of history is the heaviest of all. It creates impatience and the desire to see results as quickly as possible, although it is precisely here that the cards advise against rushing or disturbing the balance. In the third part, we will examine what Mark Netanyahu will leave on history, look at forecasts for the future, and draw our final conclusions.